Last year, China was deeply shaken when the news of a horrifying crime surfaced unexpectedly. It wasn't just the brutality of the act that stunned the public, but the fact that the perpetrators were two teenagers, both under the age of 15, who had murdered their own classmate for a senseless reason. Today, we're going to unravel the tragic case of the Hebei teen murder and examine the disturbing chain of events that led to such a devastating outcome. The victim in this case was a 13-year-old boy named Wang, a student at an undisclosed school in Hebei province. His life had never been easy. With his parents working far from home, he was left behind, raised not by the people who had brought him into the world, but by his aunt and grandparents. His father, who worked in a distant coastal province, was a rare presence in his life, appearing only for short visits before disappearing again for months at a time. For Wang, this was normal. This was all he had ever known. But normal didn't mean easy. Very little was known about Wang's day-to-day life while he was alive. He kept to himself. He wasn't the type of child to make a fuss, to demand attention. But after his death, the truth about his life began to surface, and the picture that emerged was nothing short of heartbreaking. He was quiet. He didn't have many friends. He never seemed to fit in. He was bullied severely. And it wasn't just schoolyard teasing or harmless pranks. It was relentless, cruel, and unescapable. It weighed on him, suffocated him, and little by little, it broke him down. His mental health deteriorated to the point where his pain became visible, not just in his actions, but in his words. His social media posts hinted at deep depression, messages so bleak they should have been a cry for help. A classmate later recalled that Wang had even said that he wanted to die. He was only 13. He should have been at an age where life was just beginning. But somehow, it already seemed like he had given up hope. And at the center of this suffering were three names: Zhang, Li, Ma. These weren't just classmates. They weren't just troublemakers. They were his tormentors. The three boys had turned bullying into something systematic. They weren't satisfied with just mocking him or making his life miserable in class. They wanted something from him: money. Again and again, they forced him to hand over whatever little he had. He never fought back. He never refused. It was easier to comply, easier to give them what they wanted and hope they would leave him alone. It became such a regular occurrence that Wang had no choice but to ask his grandfather for money before heading to school each morning. Nobody questioned why. Nobody wondered what he needed it for. Nobody saw it for what it really was. It went on long enough that even his own family failed to notice the weight pressing down on his small shoulders. The school did nothing. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they just didn't want to get involved. On March 10th, 2024, Zhang, Li, and Ma came up with a plan that was far more twisted than their usual schemes. Maybe they were tired of getting just pocket change from Wang. Or maybe they were curious. How far could they push him before he finally broke? Whatever their reasoning, they decided that today, they weren't just going to take his money. They forced Wang to come with them, giving him no choice but to obey. CCTV footage later captured the four of them riding away on scooters, Zhang and Wang on one, with Li and Ma following closely behind. They didn't go far, just about 100 meters from Wang's modest home. They veered off the main road and toward an abandoned greenhouse. The place was perfect for what they had in mind: desolate, eerie, completely cut off from the outside world. Once inside, they cornered Wang. This wasn't new for him. He had been through this before. Hand over the money, take the beating if necessary, and hope they'd get bored and leave him alone. So, like always, he did as they asked. He handed over the cash he had on him, hoping it would be enough. But this time it wasn't. Something in them, greed, rage, or maybe something even darker, wanted more. Zhang, the most aggressive of the three, reached down and grabbed a rusted shovel that had been lying nearby. His fingers curled around the handle. Then he swung. The details become hazy after this, but one thing is certain, Zhang and Li didn't stop. They beat him mercilessly, striking him over and over. The sharp edge of the rusted metal tore through skin, through bone, but it still wasn't enough for them. Wang screamed, but there was no one to hear him. His cries didn't matter. His pain didn't matter. Ma stood frozen. He hadn't expected it to go this far. He had always been part of the bullying, but this was different. Panic surged through him, and instead of stepping in, instead of stopping the nightmare that was unfolding before him, he ran. He wanted nothing to do with what was happening. But Zhang and Li, they continued. They hit him again and again, their blows becoming more frenzied, more violent. They didn't stop until Wang stopped moving, until his body lay crumpled on the cold, dirty floor, until he stopped breathing. And just like that, he was gone. Most people, after realizing they had just killed someone, would panic. Zhang and Li didn't. Instead, they saw it as an opportunity. They took Wang's phone, they unlocked it, they transferred 191 yuan, just $26 from his WeChat account to theirs. And then, as if that wasn't enough, they decided they couldn't just leave him there. They needed to cover their tracks. There was already a shallow grave inside the greenhouse, waiting. Had it been prepared beforehand, or was it just a horrible coincidence? It didn't matter. They carried Wang's lifeless body, dragged him across the dirt, and lowering him into the hole. They buried him beneath the earth, shoving dirt over his small, broken frame. And when it was done, they walked away, calm, composed, and without a trace of remorse, like nothing had happened at all. As the hours passed and Wang still had not returned home, his family's worry turned into panic. He wasn't answering his phone, and it wasn't like him to just disappear without telling anyone. That night, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, his family went to the police station and reported him missing. They knew Wang. He wouldn't just run off. Something had happened. The next morning, officers arrived at Wang's school, hoping to find answers. They began questioning his classmates, searching for someone who might have seen or heard something. But Zhang, Li, and Ma stuck to their story. They denied everything. They claimed they hadn't seen Wang, that they had no idea where he was. They kept their expressions neutral, their lies effortless. None of Wang's other classmates could provide any useful information either. Wang had been withdrawn, barely interacting with anyone, living in his own world of silence and survival. To them, he was just another quiet kid, someone who wouldn't be missed right away. For a moment, it seemed like the investigation had hit a dead end. Then, something unexpected happened. Ma cracked. Racked with fear and guilt, he couldn't keep up the act anymore. His mind kept replaying the scene. The rusted shovel, the blood on the ground, Wang's lifeless body. And it became too much, so he broke. He came forward to the police, his voice shaking, and told them everything. His friends had done something terrible to Wang. The officers took his words seriously. They didn't waste time with doubt or hesitation. They demanded to know where Wang was. Ma led them to the greenhouse. Step by step, he guided them toward the exact spot where they had buried him. His hands trembled as he pointed at the patch of disturbed earth, the place where Wang had been hidden from the world. When the police began digging, their worst fears were confirmed. The body they unearthed was bruised, bloodied, and unrecognizable. Wang had been beaten so savagely that his face was barely distinguishable. He was gone, and he had died alone. Zhang, Li, and Ma were immediately taken into custody. The weight of the crime had finally caught up with them. Because they were minors, the investigation was kept largely private, but Wang's family refused to let his death fade into the background. Overcome with grief and rage, his father turned to Douyin, China's version of TikTok, and began posting about his son. He shared pictures of Wang, talking about how much he had loved visiting his father on holidays, how they would go to the beach together, how he had once been so full of life. Now, all his father had were memories. The news of Wang's murder spread like wildfire, shaking the country. People couldn't comprehend how something like this had happened. How had the violence escalated to this level without a single adult noticing? Wang's case became more than just a crime story. It became a symbol of everything that was wrong, with the way society treated left-behind children, with the way bullying was handled in schools, and with the way silence allowed cruelty to flourish. On December 30th, 2024, the court finally delivered its verdict. China had already lowered its age of criminal responsibility in 2021, reducing it from the international standard of 14 to 12 for special cases involving extremely cruel means that result in death. Under this law, children who commit such crimes can face life imprisonment, or, in the most severe cases, even the death penalty. For Zhang, Li, and Ma, justice was swift and unforgiving. Zhang, the most brutal and remorseless of the group, was sentenced to life in prison. Li, who had actively participated in the murder, received a 12-year prison sentence. As for Ma, who had fled the scene and later helped police uncover the truth, the court acknowledged his lesser role. Instead of prison, he was sentenced to correctional education, a measure aimed at reforming juvenile offenders. The verdict did not bring peace. Instead, it ignited a huge debate across China. Some argued that sentencing children to life in prison was too extreme, that their young minds were still developing, and that they should be given a chance to rehabilitate. Others saw it differently. To them, Zhang and Li had acted with intent, brutality, and a total lack of remorse. They had not only killed Wang, they had beaten him to death, stolen from him, and then buried his body like garbage. How could they be given any leniency after that? Then there was Ma's sentence. Unlike the others, Ma had not participated in Wang's murder. He had fled. He had eventually come forward and told police the truth. But did that excuse his earlier silence? Should he have received a harsher punishment? What about Zhang? Was life in prison truly justice? Or was it simply creating another lost cause, a child who had become a monster before even reaching adulthood? Wang's case was not just a singular tragedy. Concerns over bullying and school violence had been rising in China for years, long before Wang's case. But in recent times, the issue had taken on a disturbing new form. More and more videos of bullying were being recorded on cell phones and spread across social media, turning acts of cruelty into entertainment. These videos exposed the brutal reality that many children endured every day, a reality that had often gone unseen. Zhang Dongshuo, a Beijing-based defense attorney unaffiliated with the case, pointed out that Wang's murder was just one in a string of juvenile killings that had surfaced in recent years. He emphasized that a lack of parental guidance, particularly for left-behind children, had long been an unresolved crisis in China. But instead of improving, the problem had only worsened. Left-behind children, those whose parents migrate to cities for work and leave them in the care of relatives or grandparents, are among the most vulnerable in Chinese society. Shuang Lu, an assistant professor in social work at the University of Central Florida, weighed in on the issue in a CNN report, offering insight into the disturbing cycle of violence. She argued that juvenile crime is rarely just a random act of evil. Instead, it often stems from deep-rooted family and social failures. Whether for a sense of power, a desperate bid for attention, or sheer boredom, left-behind children were not just more likely to be victims, they were also more prone to becoming perpetrators. If these children's mental health problems were not properly addressed, Lu warned tragedies like Wang's would keep happening. Bullying is not just a problem confined to China, it is a global crisis. But in China, it has taken on a new, disturbingly brazen form. Perpetrators no longer just seek power over their victims in private. They now record their cruelty and share it with the world, turning humiliation and violence into entertainment. One particularly horrifying case surfaced just weeks after Wang's murder. On April 23rd, a 14-year-old girl in Changsha was brutally assaulted by her schoolmates. The attack was violent, relentless, and calculated. And just like Wang, she had nowhere to run. Her tormentors filmed the entire assault and uploaded it online, treating her suffering as nothing more than a spectacle for social media. Humiliated and broken, the girl attempted to take her own life. Her video went viral. People were outraged, but despite the public uproar, very few people had stepped in to help her when it actually mattered. The attack had taken place inside a school, under the very noses of teachers and administrators. Adults were supposed to protect her. The fact that no one had intervened only deepened the sense of frustration and anger across the nation. Bullying is something many of us have experienced at some point, as victims, as bystanders, and sometimes even as perpetrators. It doesn't always leave visible scars. It doesn't always involve physical violence. Sometimes the damage is psychological, emotional, invisible to the outside world. But left unchecked, bullying can grow into something far worse. Wang's story is proof of that. The reality is that preventing bullying isn't just about punishing the bullies after the damage is done. True prevention requires a collective effort. But if Wang's case has taught us anything, it's that ignoring the signs comes at a deadly cost. No child should feel like they have no escape. No child should have to live in fear. And no child should have to die because of it. Wang was just one of many victims. His story should serve as a reminder that bullying kills, and that stopping it is not just the responsibility of schools or governments, but of all of us. May Wang rest in peace, and may his death not be in vain. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.